Got the first HOA fine the same morning I found my late wife's swing still hanging under that red maple, swaying like she'd never left. Name's Tom Walker. Widower. Telecom guy. 53. The porch smelled like pine and grief. In my hand, her old brass mailbox key, still warm from the sun. Funny how one swing can tip an entire neighborhood sideways. Ever wonder what happens when the rules forget the people they're supposed to protect? The porch hadn't changed in 30 years. The faded white rocking chair still sat near the window, and the same wind chimes clinked softly with the mountain breeze. But it was the swing, hung low from the thick branch of the red maple, that pulled Emily's eyes. It dangled slightly, as if waiting for her. Tom Walker cut the engine of the pickup and stepped out slowly, letting the cool November air hit him full in the face. The gravel crunched beneath his boots. "Home," he said softly. Emily didn't answer. She sat curled in the passenger seat, hoodie drawn tight around her face. Her earbuds were in, though Tom had no idea if anything was actually playing. It didn't matter. She hadn't said much since Sarah's funeral last spring, and this whole trip was his attempt to change that, even if neither of them had the words yet. He grabbed their bags from the back and walked up the 2 steps to the porch. The wood creaked under his weight. When he pushed open the door, the smell of pine, dust, and something faintly sweet welcomed him in. Sarah had always insisted on cinnamon sticks in the entry jar. "Still here," he whispered. Emily finally opened her door, stepping out slowly. She glanced around like she was unsure the place was real. Then she saw it, the swing, and something shifted in her face. She walked toward it, tentative at first, then quicker. By the time Tom returned to the porch, she was already seated on it, feet swinging back and forth. And then, laughter. Not loud, not forced. A soft, honest giggle. Tom's throat tightened. He pulled out his phone, recording a few seconds before slipping it back into his jacket. That swing had been Sarah's idea. Said every child deserved a place to fly, even just a foot above ground. He was still watching when a crisp voice called out, "Afternoon." A woman in a tailored burgundy coat walked toward them from the neighboring property. Clipboard in hand, notepad visible, smile stiff and controlled. "I'm Linda Mershaw," she said brightly. "President of the Ashbrook Lake Homeowners Association." Tom stepped off the porch. "Tom Walker. This is my daughter, Emily." "Lovely," Linda said, eyes flicking to the swing. "You folks just arriving?" Tom nodded. "First time back in a while. This place has been in my wife's family since the 90s. Linda glanced at her clipboard. I don't see an occupancy update filed with the HOA office. You are planning to stay overnight?" Tom smiled, polite but firm. "The cabin predates the HOA. It's fully deeded. We're not technically subject to HOA oversight." Linda's smile didn't waver, but her grip on the clipboard tightened slightly. "Well, we like to keep everyone in the loop for safety reasons. You know, so folks don't think a property's being squatted on." Emily's swing had slowed. She stepped off it and drifted quietly toward the porch. "I appreciate the concern," Tom said. "We're just here to find some peace." Linda tilted her head. "Of course. Just making note." She pulled out her phone and snapped a photo of their license plate. Then another of the front yard. Tom raised a brow. "Is that necessary?" "Community safety," Linda repeated, almost sweetly. "We'll be in touch." She turned and walked briskly back to her yard, high heels clicking on the stone path. Tom turned to Emily. She had gone back inside. The swing moved gently, abandoned again. That night, as the wind rustled through the red leaves outside and the cabin creaked softly in the dark, Emily's voice floated from her room. "Dad?" "Yeah, sweetheart. That lady, she scares me. Like, actually scares me." Tom didn't answer right away. He stared at the ceiling, the shadows of the old fan rotating above him. "She's just protective," he offered weakly. But deep down, something told him this wasn't going to be a restful retreat. The first knock came just after breakfast. Tom was rinsing mugs in the sink while the scent of fresh coffee hung in the air. Outside, a light November drizzle tapped gently against the tin roof. Emily sat at the small kitchen table, silently picking at a slice of pumpkin pie they'd picked up from the diner in town. She hadn't touched it. The knock came again, louder, firmer. Tom wiped his hands on a dish towel and stepped onto the front porch, the old screen door creaking behind him. 2 police cruisers and a white social services van stood parked on the gravel drive. A trio of uniformed figures stood at attention, rain dampening their shoulders. Tom's stomach dropped. "Mr. Walker," one of the officers called, stepping forward. "Yes." Tom answered cautiously, glancing toward the tree line. He noticed the red maple first, and then beyond it, Linda Mershaw, standing on her porch with a steaming mug of something and a smile far too casual for the scene unfolding. "I'm Officer Brad Simmons," the taller man said. "And this is Officer Lane. With us is Ms. Marianne Graves, Department of Social Services. We received a call about a possible welfare concern." Tom blinked. "A what?" Officer Simmons looked apologetic but firm. "A report was filed about a minor in distress and a man unloading belongings in a suspicious manner." Behind him, the social worker stepped forward. Marianne Graves wore a navy coat and a leather folder tucked under one arm. She looked more librarian than bureaucrat, gentle-eyed and middle-aged, but she approached with clear routine. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker," she said, voice soft but rehearsed. "It's procedure. We'll need to speak with both of you separately, just to ensure everyone's safe and accounted for." From inside, Emily's voice called out, "Dad?" Tom turned. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just stay upstairs, okay?" But Emily had already come to the door. Her eyes widened at the sight of the uniforms, and she instinctively stepped back. Marianne crouched slightly, offering a smile. "Hi, Emily. I'm just here to check in. Can we talk for a few minutes? Maybe somewhere private?" Tom's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "We'll cooperate. But you're going to want to see these." He handed over a small folder he kept in the kitchen drawer, Sarah's idea years ago. Inside were Emily's birth certificate, court-certified custody documents, and the names of grief counselors they had both seen over the summer. Marianne reviewed the contents quickly, lips pressing into a thin line. "Thank you. Let's talk to Emily first, then I'll circle back to you." They took her inside the cabin, leaving Tom to pace the porch. Rain continued to fall in misty veils over the lake, softening the world into silence. In the corner of his eye, Tom saw movement, Linda walking her tiny dog to the edge of her property line, waving with exaggerated concern. "Everything all right over there?" she called. Tom didn't answer. He gripped the porch railing tighter. 20 minutes later, Emily re-emerged, tear-streaked but upright. Her hands trembled as she reached for her father. "I told them I'm safe. I told them you're my dad." "I know," he murmured, pulling her close. Marianne joined them, her tone apologetic. "I'm truly sorry. This happens more than we'd like to admit. We're required to respond to every credible report, especially involving minors." Tom exhaled slowly. "And what made this one credible?" Marianne hesitated, eyes flicking briefly toward the neighbor's porch. "We're not permitted to say. But I can assure you, no action will be taken today. Please, don't let this ruin your time here." The group left without further incident, engines kicking up damp leaves as they pulled away. Emily stood barefoot on the porch, watching the taillights disappear down the lane. "Are they going to take me?" she whispered. "Will she do it again?" Tom crouched beside her. "No one's taking you anywhere. I promise." But as he rose, a flicker of white caught his eye, an envelope tucked inside the rusted mailbox at the end of their gravel walk. He pulled it free, heart already bracing. HOA notice. Violation number 1, unauthorized occupancy fine, $600. Across the yard, Linda sipped her tea and smiled. By noon, 5 new envelopes had landed on the porch. Tom stood at the kitchen counter, each violation notice lined up like a paper firing squad. He skimmed them, one by one. Noise disturbance during move-in, $500. Unkempt grass, $400. Visible trash bin on non-collection day, $300. 2 more 4 unauthorized exterior changes and vehicle alignment totaling another $1,300. All from the Ashbrook Lake HOA. All signed by Linda Mershaw, President. Tom muttered, "We haven't even hung curtains yet." Across the room, Emily sat at the breakfast table, chewing silently on a pecan muffin he'd made from Sarah's old recipe. The cinnamon sweet scent filled the warm cabin, trying its best to soften the edges of an increasingly absurd reality. "This doesn't make sense," she said suddenly. Tom looked up. "What doesn't?" Emily turned her laptop screen toward him. "The rules. I downloaded the HOA bylaws from their website. There's nothing in here about noise restrictions during moving, or trash bin placement, or curtain colors. Nothing." Tom wiped his hands and walked over. "Maybe there's a newer version." "This file was uploaded last month," she said. "It's the most recent. And get this, there are complaints from other neighbors on the Ashbrook Community Facebook page. Same thing, sudden fines, no official rule backing them. And all the complaints seem to involve Linda." Tom raised a brow. "You're saying this is a pattern?" "I'm saying it smells like power tripping." She opened a new Google Doc and titled it Linda Mershaw, HOA Overreach Pattern. Tom couldn't help but smile slightly. "She always write those newsletters, right?" Emily added. "Protecting Ashbrook Together. All about preserving order and community values. I found 4 issues archived online. They're like manifestos." "Do I want to know?" Tom asked. "Probably not." The two worked in companionable silence for the next hour, Tom organizing Sarah's spice jars, Emily tapping furiously at the keyboard. Outside, the gray sky settled heavier over the lake, and geese skimmed the surface before vanishing into the trees. Suddenly, Emily froze. "Hold on." She stood and stepped over to the tall wooden hutch in the corner. From behind a row of old cookbooks, she pulled out a thin folder labeled Cabin Docs, Grandpa, in fading blue ink. Inside were a few yellowed property maps, a laminated land deed, and a one-page agreement titled Ashbrook Lakeside HOA Mutual Covenant, 1994. The signature at the bottom read, George Walker, Emily's grandfather. But something about it looked off. She rifled through a drawer and pulled out an old birthday card Grandpa had given her years ago. She laid it side by side with the covenant document. "Look," she whispered. The birthday card signature was bold, loopy, unmistakable. The signature on the HOA agreement? Blocky. Hesitant. Like someone trying too hard. "This is forged," she said. Tom leaned in. "You sure?" Emily nodded. "I used to copy his signature in my sketchbooks when I was 10. I know the curve of his W. This one's all wrong. Look at the spacing between the A and L in Walker, it's too tight. Grandpa wrote like he was driving a Cadillac. Whoever wrote this used a tricycle." Tom rubbed his jaw, studying the page again. "Then it's time to find out what else they faked." Emily held the sheet up to the lamp's soft glow, tilting it ever so slightly. The golden light filtered through the page like honey over linen. She squinted at the signature again, George Walker, then laid it beside the cracked leather fishing license her grandfather had signed in 1992. "That's not his handwriting," she said quietly. Tom leaned in from across the study desk, eyes narrowing behind his reading glasses. The small study room still smelled like cedar and pipe tobacco, and the faint tap of drizzle played against the windows. The makeshift workspace was littered with open photo albums, yellowed envelopes, and neatly folded letters that Sarah had preserved in a biscuit tin marked Summer, 1990. All of it had been pulled from the dusty shelves after dinner, when neither father nor daughter could sit still with the fines and forged document hanging over them. I mean, look at this, Emily continued, pointing to the loopy G on the fishing license. It glides. Grandpa's cursive always looked like he was late to church, fast, confident, a little messy. But this one, she tapped the HOA agreement, this one's nervous. Look at the way they formed the W in Walker. It's tight, like they were copying a sample. Tom nodded slowly. Sarah used to say her dad's handwriting was like jazz. All rhythm and swing. Emily smiled faintly. Exactly. They sat in silence for a moment. The room held more than old papers, it held stories. The braided rug, the ticking wall clock, even the lamp with the faded shade, all seemed to lean in, listening. Tom rifled through a side drawer and pulled out a folder he hadn't touched in years. You know, he said, flipping pages, the HOA was formed in '96. I remember Linda crowing about it when she first got voted in. Said it was time to bring order to the lakeside. Emily looked up. But this cabin was built in '93. Mom showed me the photos once, Grandpa cutting the first plank himself. Tom tapped the edge of the agreement. Then how could he have signed it? They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Emily opened her laptop again and began searching. North Carolina property law, she murmured, typing. Okay. Here, homes built prior to the establishment of an HOA are not legally bound to its authority unless the property owner signs a voluntary agreement. So even if this were real, Tom said, holding up the flimsy HOA covenant, it would have to be signed after 1996, and it clearly wasn't. Emily hesitated. Then reached for the weathered family Bible Sarah had insisted they keep in the study. Between Psalms and Proverbs was an envelope sealed in brittle tape. On the front, Grandpa's firm script read, County Records, do not lose. Inside, a typed letter on official county stationery dated March 3, 1997. Tom unfolded it slowly. Parcel #AL 391, exemption from HOA binding. This property, located at 42 Loon Hollow Lane, Ashbrook Lake, North Carolina, was developed and occupied prior to the creation of the Ashbrook Lakeside Homeowners Association. As such, it is not and has never been under mandatory HOA jurisdiction. Any attempts to enforce HOA compliance or assessments on this property shall be considered extra-legal. Tom sank back in his chair, exhaling deeply. They've been trespassing. Legally. All this time. Emily's eyes lit with something sharper than outrage, resolve. What if we're not the only ones, she whispered. What if others in the neighborhood were lied to, too? Tom leaned forward, fingers steepled. Then maybe, it's time Ashbrook found out. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the lake glassy and still. For the first time in days, the cabin felt like it belonged to them again. Tom never imagined that handing out apple cider beside a fold-out table and a poster board would be his way of fighting back. But here he was, under a pop-up tent at Ashbrook Lake's annual fall festival, flanked by hay bales, cornstalks, and a cooler filled with Sarah's old cider recipe. He glanced over at Emily, who was handing out flyers with a calm confidence he hadn't seen since before the funeral. The hand-lettered sign behind them read, Ashbrook Homes, did yours exist before 1996? A historical look at property exemptions and community oversight. Below it, Tom had neatly arranged photocopies of their cabin's 1993 build permit, the 1997 county exemption letter, and a blown-up quote from North Carolina's HOA statute. Pre-HOA residences are not subject to mandatory enforcement unless voluntarily enrolled. The booth sat on the far end of the fairgrounds, tucked between the pie-tasting tent and the retired fire truck display. Bluegrass music floated from the stage, and the scent of roasted corn and cinnamon fritters hung heavy in the air. Emily nudged his arm. Here comes Mrs. Caldwell. The petite older woman waddled closer, wrapped in a wool shawl, her cane clicking softly on the gravel path. She accepted a flyer from Emily and leaned in to study the laminated map. My house was built in 1989, she murmured. I've paid those HOA fees every year since 2000. She blinked. But I never signed anything. Tom offered a gentle smile. You might not have had to. Mrs. Caldwell blinked again, then took a cider cup with a shaking hand. Well, I'll be. A few more curious residents trickled in. Some were neighbors Tom vaguely recognized, folks who kept to themselves, like Roger Lynn, the quiet man who served as treasurer on the HOA board. Roger stood back initially, arms crossed, lips pursed. Then he stepped forward and silently flipped through the binder of documents. When he reached the page with George Walker's exemption certificate, his jaw tightened. I wasn't aware of this, he said slowly. Linda told us all properties were under universal compliance since '97. Tom replied evenly, we only found this a few nights ago. Thought the festival might be a good place to share, just in case anyone else has questions. Roger nodded once. You were right to bring it. By mid-afternoon, the cider cooler was empty, and a quiet murmur was building around the fair. People sipped drinks, browsed quilts, and then circled back toward Tom's booth with curious glances. One man pulled out his phone and began scrolling his county records app. A young couple discussed their deed in hushed tones. Emily, her cheeks pink from the cool air, sat cross-legged near the table typing on her laptop. Her blog post draft blinked at the top of the screen. HOA or hoax? What our cabin taught us about boundaries, legal and otherwise. Catchy, Tom whispered. Thanks, she grinned. Not bad for a kid who cried over fines last week, huh? He ruffled her hair gently. Not bad at all. Then came the voice neither of them wanted to hear. Shut it down. Linda Mershaw stormed toward them in a maroon wool coat, her heels crunching the straw-scattered ground. Her lipstick was a little too red, her smile stretched too thin. You're sowing confusion, she hissed. Misinformation. This kind of exhibit damages the reputation of our community. Several heads turned. Roger stepped between them calmly. Linda, he said, they're presenting official records. If those documents are accurate, we need to verify them, not silence them. Linda's nostrils flared. You're taking their side. I'm taking the truth's side, Roger replied. Linda spun on her heel and stormed away, her scarf flapping like a banner of retreat. The fair resumed its rhythm after a few awkward beats. A toddler shrieked with laughter from the ring toss booth. A volunteer passed around slices of pumpkin pie. Life continued. As they packed up, Emily folded the leftover flyers carefully and stacked them in a box. Tom reached for the poster board, but paused. A folded slip of paper was wedged behind the cider pot. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was shaky and unsigned. She threatened me too. Keep going. The metal folding chairs screeched and groaned beneath shifting bodies. The Ashbrook Community Hall hadn't hosted this many residents since the holiday bake-off in 2018, and tonight, the only thing being served was stale coffee and barely disguised tension. Tom straightened his stack of documents, the edges of each page crisp from reprinting. Emily adjusted the small projector she'd borrowed from the library, her fingers steady as stone. At the front of the room, Linda Mershaw stood beside the podium, clipboard gripped like a shield. Her maroon blazer was buttoned too tight, and her voice, once sweet and measured, was now a brittle echo. We're here, she began, because a certain resident, her eyes flicked toward Tom, has repeatedly disrupted the peace, ignored process, and sown distrust within our community. A few polite coughs floated in the air. Some neighbors sat forward. Others looked at their laps. Mr. Walker, Linda continued, has received 6 documented violation notices. He has failed to comply with community codes and has chosen instead to challenge the very structure that supports Ashbrook Lake's unique charm. Tom rose slowly. May I speak? Linda stiffened but nodded. Briefly. Tom walked to the center of the room, setting his folder on the table beside her podium. I'm not here to challenge community values, he said. I'm here to clarify the truth. He opened the folder and passed several pages to the board members, Sandra Polk, Roger Lynn, and an older man named Harold who'd been silent all evening. This is our deed, issued 1993, Tom said. This is the county exemption certificate from 1997, confirming our cabin is not subject to HOA oversight. A murmur spread across the room. Emily clicked the projector. A simple timeline appeared on the screen. 1993, Walker cabin built. 1996, HOA incorporation. 1997, agreement filed with forged signature. 2023, violation notices begin. Tom pointed. This agreement, he held up a scanned copy, bears a signature that doesn't match my father-in-law's. Not in flow, not in shape, not even in spelling. A ripple of uneasy laughter broke out. Beyond that, Emily added, stepping forward, we've cross-referenced nearly a dozen similar cases in Ashbrook where exemption was likely ignored. Residents were told they had no choice but to comply, when that wasn't true. Roger leaned into his mic. Linda, did you verify these records before issuing fines? Linda opened her mouth. Closed it. We operate in good faith, she said slowly. Some of these files are old. Things slip through the cracks. You threatened my family, Tom replied, his voice even. You involved social services. You publicly accused me of endangering my daughter. His hand rested on the table. And so tonight, he continued, I am informing the board of my intent to file a civil complaint against Linda Mershaw for harassment, forgery, and abuse of position. The room gasped. Linda's hand trembled as she reached for her clipboard, papers rustling beneath her fingertips. You wouldn't dare, she whispered. Tom's gaze didn't waver. Watch me. The community hall was unusually still. No whispers, no coffee cups clinking, just the quiet breathing of 30 residents, waiting for the inevitable. Linda Mershaw sat at the end of the long table, her clipboard resting untouched in her lap. The polished gold HOA pin on her collar seemed suddenly out of place, too shiny for a night like this. Roger Lynn stood at the podium, glasses low on his nose. We'll now move to a board-only vote on the motion to remove Linda Mershaw as HOA president, effective immediately. No dramatic speeches. No angry outbursts. Just the sound of each board member saying yes into the microphone. 5 in favor, Roger concluded. None opposed. Linda didn't yell. She didn't plead. She stared straight ahead as if watching a play she used to direct crumble from the wings. Her knuckles whitened, but her mouth remained closed. Sandra Polk cleared her throat and stepped up. To our neighbors, we owe you an apology. Not just for the fines or the confusion, but for allowing this authority to go unchecked for too long. From the audience, Mrs. Caldwell raised a trembling hand. I paid over $6,000 across 12 years, she said quietly. For mailbox repainting, porch light tone violations. I thought I was keeping up the neighborhood. Several others nodded. A retired veteran mentioned fines for having a flag too large. A couple spoke about being cited for holiday decorations overstaying their welcome. Emily remained at the back of the room, phone in hand. She tapped publish on her latest blog post. Truth at Ashbrook, the HOA reckoning. Tonight, something changed. Neighbors remembered their voice. Up front, Tom stood and approached Linda slowly. From his jacket pocket, he pulled a slim envelope. Ms. Mershaw, he said calmly, this is a formal notification of civil complaint, filed on behalf of myself and others affected by your misconduct. He set it gently on the table in front of her. Linda stared at it for a long moment. Her hands didn't move. You used the system to intimidate people, Tom added, not unkindly. But the system works both ways. Her eyes finally met his, glassy, uncertain. But still, she said nothing. The room stayed silent as she rose. Her footsteps echoed as she walked to the door, past neighbors who no longer made eye contact. Not out of cruelty, but disillusionment. Outside, the evening air was cool and golden. Dust motes floated in the fading light. Tom stepped onto the porch steps, letting the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. Behind him, Emily joined quietly. An older man in a flannel jacket approached and extended a hand. "About time someone stood up to her," he said. "You did good, son." Tom shook his hand firmly. "Wasn't just me." The man nodded, eyes shifting to Emily. "No, it rarely is." The new sign hung proudly beneath the mailbox, carved in warm cedar and polished until it caught the sun. Walker Cabin, HOA exempt since 1993. But it was the second line that made Tom smile as he poured fresh cider into mason jars. Protected by Grandpa. Restored by Emily. It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and Ashbrook Lake had never looked more peaceful. The air smelled like wood smoke and apples. A dozen pies cooled on the porch railing, pumpkin, pecan, even one surprise sweet potato from Mr. Green down the hill. The once lonely cabin lawn was full of chatter now. Emily had called it a "thank you cider hour," and neighbors came willingly, some with cautious glances, others with warm embraces. No one mentioned Linda Mearshaw, though her house now sat dark and empty, a moving truck having carried her out of town a few days earlier. Mrs. Caldwell brought a quilt and a jar of cranberry preserves. She walked up to Emily with a small wooden box and placed it gently in her hands. "These were my husband's tools," she said. "He built our porch swing with them back in '88. He'd be proud of what you did." Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the box and ran her hand over the worn, smooth handles. "Thank you," she whispered. Roger Lynn stood nearby, sipping cider, his tie slightly askew. "Board elections are in 2 weeks, he said to Tom with a grin. "Looks like folks want me to keep the chair warm a little longer." Tom chuckled, eyes sweeping the crowd, kids playing tag between the trees, couples catching up near the cider table, an old neighbor strumming a banjo. "You've earned it, Roger." As the sun dipped behind the hills, Emily emerged from the cabin with a wide grin. Behind her, 2 swings now hung from the old red maple. One aged, creaky, familiar. The other, brand new, handcrafted, sanded with love. She stepped onto the new one, let her feet swing gently forward, hair catching the breeze. Tom watched, hands in his pockets, eyes misty. "This time," she called out, "no one's taking it away." Laughter rippled across the yard. Later, as the neighbors slowly trickled home with leftover pie slices and warm cider in hand, Tom and Emily sat side by side on the porch swing. The stars blinked above. The scent of cinnamon drifted out from the kitchen, where a turkey brined quietly for the coming feast. Tom reached over, squeezed her hand. "You saved this place," he said. Emily leaned her head on his shoulder. "So did you." And for the first time since Sarah's passing, the cabin felt whole again, not just because it was safe, or because Linda was gone, but because community had returned, like leaves to a tree that had weathered the storm. Not a single chain remained. Just wood, laughter, and legacy. Sometimes, the quietest victories echo the longest, like a swing finally set free, moving gently in a breeze no longer owned. What began as grief and intimidation became a turning point, where a daughter's courage and a father's patience helped a whole town see clearly. Because when rules are twisted into chains, truth becomes the key that fits every lock. And maybe, just maybe, your porch light could be the next one shining for change.